You're listening to Idea Collider, a show that explores the world of asymmetric learning. On this show, I will sit down with pharmaceutical experts and business leaders to discuss how to embrace uncertainty and the different learning style that follows. I'm your host, Mike Rea. Let's get into the show.
Hello, Mike. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. How's things?
Fantastic. No complaints. No complaints. And yourself?
No, exactly the same. Yeah, it's been a good day. I got to take the morning off with some friends, and we've still got some sunshine here in England, and we were able to get to the beach, have some nice lunch, and so feels like summer hung on for another day.
Living the dream, Mike. Living the dream. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah. Where are you in the world?
I am in Seattle, Washington.
Yeah. How are things?
Weather-wise, we're about to we're starting to take the turn into rainy season, which for us is about 6 months.
Yes. Every time I've been to Seattle, every time.
Every time. We haven't turned on the sun for you?
No, not yet. No.
All right. We'll need to work on that, Mike. We'll need to work on that. You deserve better.
Yeah, I need to come more often for sure. Let's get rolling. It's always a typical gentle start. So,
sure.
I'd love you. I know a little bit about you, but I'd love you to summarize for the listeners, who you are and the kind of 100 things that you're involved in doing.
Yeah, sure. So for me, much of the business world is driven by conclusory statements. And conclusory statements are generally statements of fact that are presented without the specific supporting evidence that the conclusion is based upon. For us in the work that we do, or for me, in general, my objective is to capture know-how that exists within an enterprise and directly link the conclusions to the underlying facts that drive those conclusions, and hopefully creating an auditable understanding of why decisions are made and increasing the average commonly held understanding of the universe of know-how that exists within the enterprise.
Interesting. Yeah. No, and I love that. I even love the phrase conclusory evidence that there's a trail and transparency in decision making, which is not always apparent in organizations. So.
It's very hard to do when you're moving at speed. It's very hard to do. And so oftentimes what you have time to communicate, generally ends up being, why are we working on this project? Well, we're going to be first to market. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, why do you think we're going to be first to market, right? Well, what does this look like? What evidence do you have? Why are we going to be successful? Well, we're going to be successful, because we're going to take this approach, Our strategy for market entry, is going to work. Okay, well, why though? Well. Mm-hmm. Very, very little time, and you end up seeing this block. Similarly, if you're at the bottom of the hierarchy, with a layer of management above you, the data that you are able to push up is greatly restricted. So it just ends up being, statements of facts, and conclusions, more conclusory statements up at the top, and then the same thing, being pushed down the org.
Yeah. No, I'm going to dive into so much of that.
Sure.
So what was your journey to today? Where did you start, and what was your path to where you are now?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, I guess my path to where I'm at really started in intellectual property. I had an opportunity very early on to draft patent applications, and that brought me into actual investments with what we would call deep tech today. There was a small micro fund that was developed, and we said, look, we have this giant patent portfolio of ideas with these subject matter experts. What if any of these things could actually be turned into a business? And that got me started in 2000, and just fascinated by why is it that some businesses succeed, and others fail, and why am I continuously seeing this pattern in the business world with those that truly are the subject matter experts that have the superior technology? Why do so few of them ever end up winning their market?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Was there an easy answer, or was there a big rabbit hole to go down then?
My entire career, right, is just
Yeah.
exploring these themes. And then are there solutions? And one of the things, right, that I see is getting to a point where you can take these statements of facts, right? And then how do you back them up? What is the knowledge base, the quality of the knowledge base? How do you know what you think you know? How
Mm,
much do you know about what you think you know?
mm,
And some of these things philosophically, we have a finite amount of time on this planet. I hope there is no reincarnation. I don't know if I could do this again, Mike. But if you have a finite amount of time and you are purpose driven, right, as most human beings are, and you have an insatiable intellectual curiosity, how do you put yourself on projects, right, that create the most impact, whatever impact means for you? How do you work on those things so you can overcome a lot of these challenges that are going to be inherent to getting to the top, right? And then building a company that you would actually want to stay at the top and have a sustained competitive advantage.
yeah, it's such an interesting thing. I mean, we referenced the innovation index, but that started with, I mean, one of those simple questions about 11, 12 years ago, which same product, two companies, before clinical development, does it end up in the same place? And of course, no one that I've ever spoken to thinks the answer is yes. Yeah, the product will end up where it ends up. So you go, well, oh, so you agree that the companies are the ones adding value to their pipelines, right? That they're doing something meaningfully different. Do they know what it is that they're doing, and do they know why? Is it just about having smarter people, or do they examine their own decisions on the way through? So, I see that in pharmaceuticals deeply, but I mean, I'm guessing you've seen this across, more than one industry.
Yeah, absolutely. What becomes fascinating for me is just the universe and competition, how competition works out. A lot of the rules are the same, but then there's these idiosyncrasies within any type of industry. So pharma generally have to be on patent, and you have that prime window of earnings after clinical trials right before you hit the patent cliff.
Mhm.
Those are your prime earning years. If you look at something like mining, a mining operation, right, buys a plot of land. What they pull out of the earth, right, is finite, what they're capable of pulling out. And then how they operate in terms of, okay, well, we have to monitor our costs. We want to increase, right, the quality. We want to recover, right, as much as possible. Very, very different from a consumer electronics company that wants to sell cell phones.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And are there any companies out there, and I've seen stories about, say exploration, oil exploration companies that spend a lot of time on their decision and prediction capabilities and their ability to systematize that. Is there anyone that you see trending towards the kind of good or great versus, just average or management consultancy derived process or?
It's really interesting. I see pockets. I see pockets within enterprises where you have people that are willing to put their neck out on the line because they're so passionate about making good use of their time. They
Mhm,
want to work on something big. What is challenging for some of these larger organizations is how do you make these thought processes, how do you get them to permeate, right, the culture at large?
mhm. Yeah, and do you think decision science is ready for its time in the sun? Because it's certainly, everything that you just described in terms of, priors, in terms of biases, in terms of transparency. I mean, it's not like this is new science. This is like Mendel and his peas versus the kind of, where we're at today.
Yeah, it's I think just like anything else, we probably both see like the Gartner right curves, right, the height curve. Um, what is fascinating to me is just how there is a lack of homogeneity in terms of the capabilities, awareness, and a general, in many cases, lack of appetite for
Yeah.
this level of investigation. Many companies, as they progress, right, and they get to the top, they're like, "Well, this has been working right for us. We continue to be large, even on the decline." Right, there's this ability to point to other externalities, right, and factors. But I start seeing things in financial statements, investments, press releases, what is happening with investors, And you can kind of start getting a sense that the wheels are starting to fall off. The wheels are starting to fall off. And do they have an appetite? Can the pain be large enough, right, to be able to change? And that
Yeah,
just hasn't happened. I,
yeah,
I, I
yeah.
don't see it.
Or willing to go with that change. I think there's, it's very interesting that you look at a company like Amazon, where the decision making is almost left to a process, right? Versus, there's kind of pyramid organizations where, as you say, someone's going up and someone's coming back down with, here's the data that we think you need to see, but there's no A/B testing. There's no, there's no vulnerability in a pyramid system.
Yeah, it's what becomes fascinating, even just looking at a company like Amazon. They are so large, and many of these services, right, solve needs that are within the enterprise. So
Mm-hmm.
developing a solution that they're able to use often reduce costs.
Mm-hmm.
And so they win right out of the gate. And then it is later, as they go through with all the data that they have, they go and say, well, if we offer this, right, to others, right, will people buy it? It already works for us. So they're their own pilot, right, their own test case. These are
Yeah,
things that are challenging to recreate in other industries.
interesting. So, I mean, if I ask you a question as basic as how does data work? What's the, what would your answer be?
I mean, does it work? Shouldn't we investigate that? Does data work?
Mm-hmm.
Very spotty, right? This track record for data. Fundamentally, human beings, and I think a lot of the information that we have available to us, there's an irrational aspect, right, to what we do. Unclear to me that data as it's presented today is compelling. I don't know that data actually ultimately, right, wins the day. I think there's so much emotion that's put on top of data.
Mm-hmm.
This not just fear of missing out, but Greg Larkin does a great job of promoting this concept, right, of fear of losing power, right, for those that are in entrenched positions within an organization. Has a great book titled This Might Get Me Fired. To
Mm-hmm.
think about people that I'm sure you work with, the individuals that I work with, and how we may view ourselves, is I would rather, right, lose my job than do something that I don't feel, right, is going to deliver. Taking that principle and then thinking about, if I'm going to work on something compelling, how am I presenting the case in terms of the data, right, and underlying facts, massaging the data into something that is palatable for the personality that you're working with right on the other side. This is a bit of, I think, the discussion of data that is currently missing.
Yeah, would you? 'Cause, I mean, what you just said there has reminded me of a lot of the discussion of the science, right? So the science, the data. Well, it's just the data will tell us. And you go, well, you're going to get the data that you went looking for. You're not going to get the data that you didn't, but you're going to present the data that you did go looking for as the whole truth and nothing but
Yeah.
the truth. And I think the science is often used in the same way. So, I mean, I always feel the pharma is particularly egregious in this, but and clearly from what you're saying, it's not the only one.
No, this is a part of the human condition, and what to me makes business so fascinating. How do you elevate ideas that have the potential to win markets within an enterprise? And then you have to deal with more human beings, right? That you want to actually stop whatever it is that they're doing and consume what it is that you're pushing out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I want to draw in the strands because clearly you spent a lot of time in innovation management as well. So, when we're answering questions that no one's ever answered before, I think on my last podcast I was talking with Stephen Johnson about, I'm still trying to write this book called who do you ask when no one knows? Right? So, there's this essential problem. Most of our processes are set up for asking someone who does know the answer and then just doing what they said. But when no one knows, which is the sort of definition of innovation, who you're asking, which data are you collecting, and in which, and who you're presenting it to.
Really in this space, so much, right, of business is being able to take a question, right, and rephrase it.
Hmm.
And for me, what I see consistently, especially when scouting emerging technologies, um, I constantly hear from people, it's amazing that you could find this information on a publicly traded company, but we think anybody can do that.
Hmm.
What we want to know is how do you find information on the companies that are not publicly traded?
Yeah.
How do you find them? How much can you find, right, about them? And to me, it becomes a very interesting exercise. And where we're arriving is, can we get to a structured approach that helps us reframe what it is that we're actually doing? And what we'd like to, a way that we kind of present this, right, is hypothesis based testing. So you have an idea that something works right in a particular way. If that is your hypothesis, then there should be things that you do see and things that you don't see. And if you start finding things that you're not expecting to see, um, that should change your hypothesis, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then being able to go back, right, and explore.
Yeah. But does it? I mean, because that's the question, right? Is people either reinvent their hypothesis, their original hypothesis, or they say that was never really our hypothesis. We got this new one, or it looks close enough, but we're so the data. I mean, I don't know. We've had some data on Alzheimer's in the last couple of days presented from a potentially interesting new therapy, but although they presented a bunch of it, you've already got people polarized into it doesn't tell us anything. It tells us everything we need to know, and we're excited, or this is nothing new. These are all experts looking at the same data set, making very different conclusions on the basis of it. So yeah, it's which hypothesis was tested is fascinating.
Yes, and it really, what you hear right from both sides are these conclusory statements.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Why is this the worst thing in the world, right? Why is it, right, that this could never work, right? What do you base this on? And what you're hopefully doing in all of these conversations with people that are pro, right? Whatever data you're putting out, those that are against, can you increase the average understanding level set? Well, when you say these things, I'm not even sure what you mean by this word. This happens a lot with things like artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
But someone in marketing thinks artificial intelligence is very different than someone, right, that has a PhD, right, in AI, in computer science, right, and someone that might be an intern.
Yeah, yeah.
The level of granularity and detail and underlying assumptions, right, are all fed into these conclusory statements. So can you methodically go through, take a technology, dissect it into its fundamental technical components, and then overlay where that technology exists in the value chain, and then now start asking some questions. So you can get rid of the universe of things that have keyword hits, right, that you see. You're like, all right, well, this is not even the right industry, right? Definitely not the right value chain. Can you eliminate these things and start getting to a story that you can tell? Well, this is why I feel this way about this technology. It started this way. It evolved to this. It's now evolving, right, to something else. Here's the problems and solution statements, right, that have been resolved, right, over time. And then these appear to be the new problem solution statements. Fascinating. Can we move ourselves right into one of these new problem solution statements, given the competencies that our company has?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, well, you're sort of describing this challenge of translation of assumptions that everyone hears an assumption the same way, that they regard it as fact, or they regard it as an average of a wide range of stuff, or or they regard it as a guess in time, or but that translation between, they say, maybe two experts or two divisions of the same company might be very different.
Yeah. And just the personalities that are going to interrogate this data. A big part, right, of leadership is being okay with being wrong. Being a little bit more patient, trying to process, right, more data, alleviating blind spots, and then sticking, right, to the decision, to a point where you're looking at the outcome, and sometimes, right, that outcome isn't exactly what you expected. But as a leader, if you're leading well, you're going to be wrong a lot.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and maybe a question to pose to you, kind of almost a non-interview question, but we've been talking a lot with folks about the idea of remaining in a pre-decision mindset for as long as possible. Like the idea that there's a risk of path dependence. If you could, your first hypothesis probably limited everything that you look for after that. But if you hadn't made that decision and that prediction, and you regarded yourself as pre-decision in the way that Annie Duke would talk about playing a hand of poker, which is for a long time in that hand you haven't made a decision yet. You're looking for what the decision is going to be. That mindset is a very different one than the one where you're looking for confirmatory or or kind of or data that contradicts what your original hypothesis was.
Yeah, amazing. Which is very different than what you hear generally, right? About innovation, the C-suite, corporate development. There's this sometimes a permeation, right? That, oh, well, the enterprise doesn't make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
No one ever
Yeah.
makes any decisions, right? Sitting
Right.
around kind of doing this, right? Had a great idea, submitted all this paperwork. Someone changed, right, the template in PowerPoint. So I have to retype up my now I submit it, and like, oh, someone was sick, so they didn't have the quarterly meeting that they normally do. So now it's pushed out another month. Like very, very different from what you're talking about.
Or just the collection of evidence. If this was true, how would we know? What would we see? How would we test it? All those kind of things become very interesting.
Yeah.
But at a sort of basic level, how do you see data impacting company decisions? Is it a, are they, or are they not? Are the decisions impacting data?
Yeah, I'm sure that my sample set, right, is biased. I'm sure it's biased, but the general impression that I have is that those that have an actual pain point, those that are in a company, they're like, man, we went like gangbusters forever, and it's just been terrible the past, for whatever the time period is. Haven't
Yeah.
broken through, or we made a really, really big bet and it didn't work out, and now we're gun shy. How do we break out of this, right? And these are a lot of the companies that fortunately for me are attracted to what we're very passionate about doing.
Yeah,
uh,
actually, so what a great opportunity. So tell me more about Rapid Alpha and what you're doing, and what problems you are solving.
yeah, well, we really like to understand why people proclaim to know what they think they know. The things that we hear a lot from the executives that we're able to work with is oftentimes, well, we want to remove blind spots, right? We're going through this and we find a lot of the confirmation across the enterprise, right? But we want to see if someone else with fresh eyes maybe has a different perspective, so we can feel more confident, right, about the decisions that we're making. And along those lines, the things that we're finding and we're moving into is more actual software development. Can we take a methodology of exploring the universe of publicly available information and create a scaffolding around it that fosters much better discussion about the
Mm,
future of the company?
interesting. So those people that have invited you in, are they opportunity seeking, or are they looking to solve problems, or?
Yeah, so we see people in product development. That's a big one. Mergers and acquisitions
Mm,
is another one. Not as often invited in from the C-suite. It's usually some type of change agent. That's in the enterprise. I mean, a tiny little company like mine, the web presence, right, isn't exactly there. But through word of mouth with individuals that are more practitioners,
mm,
right?
mm,
Certainly have their boots in the trenches, rolling up their
mm.
sleeves, and are a bit muddy. We get an opportunity to work with them, but it's very much someone in M&A as you're going through and you're doing the scouting. You're going to find yourself in a meeting, and there's going to be somebody in there that spent a lot of time searching and is looking for a company name that has not been on your radar and is not going to ask if you've heard about the company. They're going to ask some like deep probing question, right? To catch you on your back foot. Like, one, never heard of this company. What the hell are you talking about? And then the next brutal follow on is like, well, why do you think this company, right, is the best?
Mhm,
Why do you think they're the best for us?
mhm,
And ideally, in that situation, you can go and say, given what our company capabilities are, what the technical stack of this company is, what
mhm.
they do, and where we need to go, irrespective of what the universe of solutions look like. This is the one that's best poised for us in terms of what we're doing. And
Interesting.
so, telling that story, right, is what we're working on doing.
Interesting. So what would you say your kind of special source is? Is it the process? Is it the people? Is it, some combination of the two?
Oh man, well, for us, the process is conducive to the types of people that we work with. You have people that are insanely intellectually curious.
Hmm.
And the level of quality of detail that they want to put on projects, right, is borderline, like, I don't know. Like for me, I like to tell people, I really belong in the back of the shop, right, with other individuals that weren't hugged enough as a child, right? Like this is a big part of the fulfillment
Yeah,
to get to that one point in a conversation where people are like, I never even thought of this way.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then see them unlock, and then they're sprinting a mile away, right, on what steps they can take. And oh man, now I got to catch up. I can't believe, right, that this just happened. But the challenge with individuals like this is we have, right, and as a business, is eventually you have to stop and you have to deliver the results,
right.
right? And this is this fine balance that we've been working on figuring out. What is the balance? How do we meet consistently our customers with where they're at, as opposed to where we would like them, right, to be?
Mm.
It's yeah, real challenge,
Yeah,
real
yeah.
challenge.
No, I recognize all of that because I think we're the same. We hire for curiosity, but I'd be interested in what your kind of your green flags or your kind of yes, this looks like the right. These people should be working here. What's your approach to that?
Really appetite, personality.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the skills that we do can be learned. A lot of the methodologies that we have someone who didn't have any experience in pharma. And I think we shared some of the insights for this Roche report that we put in, but just use the methodology. And now she's forgotten more about pharma than I'll ever know. Just because she has a methodic way, right, of tackling an entire company, its drug pipeline. You go through thousands of clinical trials, right, for one company, every startup that they've entertained, the IP portfolios, right, of all of these companies. You're going to learn a ton, but it's this purpose driven. Why are we looking at this document? What is it that we're hoping to extract from it in terms of knowledge? It's that desire and passion for that intellectual curiosity. That's what keeps us going.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and I mean the theme of this series is asymmetric learning. The idea that learning becomes your competitive advantage in most scenarios where innovation is involved,
Yeah.
and
And
focusing that the company's efforts on learning faster or better or deeper or with an insight that someone else couldn't get. I think that's exactly what you're describing there is that you've got to want to look for it and you've got to want to know that you've seen it when you've seen it.
yeah, and then if just going through the things that you have with Idea Pharma, you look at these reports and you look at these insights, and one of the maybe it's a challenge, maybe it's the most beautiful part of it, is that you're looking at a snapshot, right? Point in time. We've done the analysis up to this date. Talk to me in 30 days. And let
Right.
me tell you what's happened right in these past 30 days, 90 days from now, 6 months from now, what's happening. And if you've plotted these data points, right, in a place where you can go through and actually see movement, you're like, whoa, 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 wait a second. This company was way down here. Now all of a sudden, look at their racing ahead. What the heck happened in this time?
Mhm.
How was this possible?
Mm.
How did they go from barely qualifying, right, to fit on one of my charts to top five now in terms of sales, right, and revenues for this product?
Yeah. And
Wow.
yeah, so I'd be interested in your thoughts on this because I get asked this question a lot. I mean, there's two questions. One is, was it the company, was it the team, right? Because a lot of what we're doing is looking back historically at how they did rather than how they might do going forward. So it's, we needed it to be objective and cold in that way. So yeah, you can tell us all the stories you want, but if you didn't launch and you didn't launch successfully, there's no, we're not going to count it. And then people go, well, oh, that's great because company X did really well, and they go, well, maybe the drug succeeded despite the company, or rather than because of, and that's always hard to unpick, right? Because then you've got to know more than just what the data told you.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the challenges is that the publicly available information can only tell you so much about what went on in terms of, that room with that decision or.
And these things are always fascinating to me because when I look at this, I say, well, there's an option C, right? It is timing.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
get the timing right, it can absolve you of a lot of sins. The
Right.
universe is a very interesting place. The universe doesn't actually want to change, right, at all in the business world, in a business context. It does not want to do it. But if you
Mm.
smash against the universe long enough, hard enough, right, you get that timing right, then all of a sudden the friction, right, changes, and then now you have momentum. Very, very strange thing. So for me, even in looking at the universe of publicly available information, how much data do you need and in what areas to make a decision that unlocks timing for you?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
rely on your team, right, to get the job done.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And those case studies, we continue to publish those, right? Of, markets where first and second did well and the third didn't. And you go, well, who wants to be third anymore? Who wants to, and what did the people who were third do differently than the people that were first and second? And, that becomes a challenge because people don't really know, they don't want to admit that they took 6 months to make a decision instead of making a quick decision.
So yeah, I mean, so many of those things happen, and I think it becomes important to take a look at the characteristics and attributes of companies that in the very recently in an industry have risen to dominance. And this is one of the actually the reason why we picked Roche for pharma.
Mhm.
You take a company that 20 years ago was not in the top 10 in terms of prescription pharma sales. They're in a pretty shabby position in terms of what their pipeline looked like in terms of clinical trials. Didn't really have much of a methodology to turn that thing around. Had made some strategic investments in Gen and Tech. Had a change in CEO, and then coinciding right with these things, we start seeing for us we have a baseline of 10 years of studying and investigation. And because the CEO didn't change out, we felt there's probably this is probably a good case for us to take a look at. So how do you go from being number 11 right to number one? What
Mhm.
do you do? And it's not
Mhm.
like they had a straight shot to the top. It wasn't like they built success after success after success. After finding some success, you look at their top drugs in their pipeline, and patent cliff right is hitting on their tops.
Yeah.
How do
Yeah.
you offset that?
Yeah.
Fascinating stuff.
Oh,
Fascinating.
absolutely. And then the second thing I always end up having a lot of questions about is, what are the right KPIs for something like pharmaceutical development? So, well, there's only one KPI, which is did you launch and did you launch successfully, right? All the rest are surrogate measures, and it's a bit like trying to predict the outcome of a soccer game or anything using metrics like running stats or numbers of crosses. Maybe they're meaningful, but what if they're not, right? What if they're just more noise in the system?
Well, so, and I would love to get your input on this. One of the things that we that we started to look at, and I've got a bit of a background in finance. Like, what if you took your innovation portfolio and you try to balance it out in the same way you will with the stock portfolio?
Mhm.
What if you looked at portfolio mix, right, as a portion, right, of your KPIs, and then
Mhm.
overlay, right, company capabilities
Mhm.
on top of that to see what you can do? And for the Roche report, we got to a point where investigating the company, uh, we can almost imagine what it was like in the C-suite talking to the board, right, about these things. We could reverse engineer the budgets that they were spending, and then just the shocking regularity of the types of investments, right, that they made, what they
Mhm.
did with those investments afterwards. Like, wow, okay, there's a lot of process here. I'd love to talk with somebody at Roche because the things that we have in terms of insights, like the numbers are so uniform and they always balance out over a 3-year period. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Interesting. Well, I'd be interested in whether they know that, right? You might be.
Yes.
They don't know. Yeah.
Do you know that your organization, the way it manifests itself,
Yeah.
results in these things?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They disruptive innovation to incremental, three to
Mm.
3 to 1 in terms of results. Incremental innovation outperforms right their disruptive. Yet disruptive is a primary driver right of some of their growth. And we
Mm.
go and we plot what we expect to see from the patent cliff, right, and their revenues from their existing compounds doing this. And then you overlay the growth that they have with things that have come out of clinical trial, and it perfectly offsets it.
Mhm.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a beautiful industry for those kind of data, right? And it's like I say I don't know whether necessarily that's because then you would be unpacking your decision process instead of your investment thesis or your kind of forward-facing, projections, your 5, 10 year projections. And I don't know many companies, to a question, that do at least even have two processes running, right, to see which one's best. They just have a process that they have decided works, and it works well enough to keep them going.
Yeah, it's with Roche. What was fascinating is you see the investment, and for somebody that's a value investor, what do? You're looking at kind of somewhat distressed or underpriced assets, and they hit phase 1 clinical trials the hardest. It is not even close. Phase 1, lots of shots on goal. And then the interesting things that they do at almost for every lead indication that they have, right, they end up coming with almost 7 more either indications or alternative delivery mechanisms.
Mm.
And in that, right, they double the average success rate
Mm.
that you see, right, on a new compound.
Mm.
Fascinating, but you see like immediately, like, okay, they get something, they hit oncology hard.
Mm.
But then what becomes fascinating is even when they don't have a primary indication in oncology, they end up with a secondary indication in oncology. And now we're seeing the rise and proliferation, right, of orphan drug status in terms of what some of their initial indications are and where they're pivoting to with their secondary.
Mm.
Just
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that idea of pre-decision, right? If you used your phase 1 with that mindset, which I think is really where Roche and certainly Genentech were, I mean, 20 years ago to 15 years ago, right? A
Yeah.
lot of it was exploratory. A lot of it was pivot. They pivoted a lot in those days when things didn't work out the way they thought they were, but then they went, actually, the thing that happened looked more interesting than the thing that didn't. And if you're in that mindset, it's fine. But if all you've done is a confirmatory, it's a conclusive, right? This study showed or didn't show the thing that we wanted it to show.
Yeah.
That's a very different kind of company.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm sure for the work that you do and the people that you work with, it's how do you, how do you find these individuals that are interested in these experiments?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Running it well, and you'd think, I mean, based on your hiring process, our hiring process, most scientists are experimental, right? They they don't always think they know, and there's a process of finding out. But that gets abandoned when it gets to business, and the commercial people come in, and they think there's an easy path. I'll be interested in exploring. I mean, in terms of tracking data, in terms of this has become an issue for us. What platforms, what tools, what can people do to implement better data organization, let's put it that way.
Yeah. Well, in terms of tools, there are certainly some sources of information that we subscribe to. KT Mine is one of our favorites out of Chicago. They have a rockin' IP data set. They have, SEC filings in a searchable, explorable way. That's a fantastic thing to have access to. Markets, some press releases. It's a fantastic way for us to get to the raw and underlying data set. We've attempted to try a number of other search tools. We probably go through, just slightly under a new tool a month in
Mhm.
terms of exploration to see what we can get out of a tool. So we're testing somewhere between 8 and 10, right, a year. Very few end up sticking with us. We feel like most people are interested in trying to predict what it is that I'm looking for, but don't actually give me the tools and allow me to leverage my experience to
Interesting.
find what I'm looking for and eliminate all the garbage that I don't.
Yeah.
Instead, people want to turn myself and people like me or people that are executives in companies into data analysts, and
Mhm.
that's a horrible outcome for business. That's a terrible outcome. I don't like that at all.
So why do you think they're doing that wrapping at the end of a search tool?
Um, just like you see with a lot of giant companies, why would you pivot? Why would you move on to the next thing? It's like, oh, well, we're making money here. We're making money now. And in an industry where you can go from, oh, well, everybody else is using a SQL database and that's as boring as can be. I'm going to help you visualize your data because I'm using a graph database.
Yeah.
Like, all right, so you went from bar charts to circles. There's some relationships right in there, but this isn't getting me any closer, right, to what's going on in this into this data set. I
Yeah.
want to know what I think about these things, and I want to make it audible. So if somebody looks at, and this is the way we try to work on our reports. Here's an entire executive summary. These are our conclusory statements. You can click
Yeah.
on any of these things and get to the source material. And it's tagged and flagged and enriched with metadata to say they are talking about the technology. This is the technology readiness level. We learned something about appetite, right, for the market to consume this out of this document. And here it is. It's all highlighted for you. You can go on your own discovery journey
Yeah.
and find where I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
hey man,
Yeah.
this all makes sense, but were you aware of this? Well, let's go to the data set. No, I have a giant donut hole there. I
Yeah.
don't have that in my data set. And they
Yeah.
get like, aha, we're better than you. Like, I like to think that if we're on the same team and our goal is a
Yeah.
thorough knowledge and understanding of what your landscape is, the fact that we could identify a shortcoming in what we searched, and now I can go back in and say, are there things that we can do in our process, right, to shore this up? Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. Sometimes the juice isn't worth the squeeze. But people can at least look at my report and understand where its limitations are going to be, which I don't think you get in a lot of other market reports.
Yeah, and how interesting that kind of vulnerability of you and the client to take that journey together.
Hey, you go to McKinsey, right? And you think everything that in that report, right, is 100% accurate, and you build a business around that. You find yourself like CNN, right, launching a $10 million app, right, for getting news stories that people didn't want to get from their cable provider, right? But now you think they want to pay for it again, right, in an app.
Yeah.
Uh, what I do is flawed,
Mhm.
but I think you can get an understanding of where the shortcomings are. And if
Yeah.
you have an understanding where the shortcomings are, I think it becomes easier to fill in those gaps.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. I'm going to go back all the way back to your start in IP,
Sure.
and you said, you used the what if phrase, which I was reminded recently. I was talking to someone who used to be in IP in a pharma company. He said, back in the olden days, they used to ask us, how did it get things done? Now they just come and tell us to do things, right? They tell us to file this, file that, but they don't ask us, our thoughts or our creativity around it. So, I didn't know there was that creative option with IP. And said, oh no, if you invite us into the mix, we can give you all sorts of ways of doing things. But if you stop asking, you're going to get that thing. So, did you find that was an important starting point for you, or?
Where it became important is that it gave me a structured approach to understand how value is created in an enterprise. If you build an intellectual property asset, and for a lot of times if you find yourself in litigation and you say that damages have been incurred, right, by a competitor who is infringing your product, a logical question that comes out is, well, how much were you damaged?
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay, if I have to dissect a cell phone, right, and I want to understand what the value is from a subcomponent of the technology of the camera,
Mm.
how do I appraise that? So it gave me a background to be able to describe things in interesting ways. It gave me a multidisciplinary exposure to law,
Mhm.
to business and marketing, which
Mhm.
is a great thing for someone like me. I very much a systems person, very
Mhm.
much a systems person. So give me this great way of building the scaffolding in high conflict, high stakes situations where really the life of a company could be in the balance. Certainly, $100 million, $1 billion right transaction could be there on the table. And yeah,
Well, yeah, it's interesting just listening to you talk about essentially attribution of value, right, in a system, which I know, it's one of the hidden
challenges in something like Google is, who gets paid for what in a search engine, advertising chain becomes this massive thing, and no one even knows it's going on under the hood. But
Yeah.
if you're going to unpick an iPhone to see who generated what, I guess you can't just do this in a day or with a kind of hunch. There needs to be a system.
Yeah, and it's at least for where things are today, right? There's a bit of art, there's a bit of science, some mysticism right in there, a bit of maybe sometimes the process, right, is driven towards a conclusion, right, that you're trying to achieve, right, within a certain range. It's a real challenge, but bringing that thought process into product development, how much value could you create here?
Mm.
Okay, we think it's going to be this big. Okay, great, but who's buying this? Why are they buying it? What is it in their demographic, their profile, their buying behaviors that leads you to believe that this is the right conclusion, that this is going to get us to where we're going? We constantly are faced from people in product development, and to a lesser extent, right? We see this drive from the C-suite. We allocated this budget for R&D. We have a much larger universe of options that are out there and available to us. Now, how do we pick, right, the best projects? And then you have these fantastic philosophical questions, right, about, well, what is best? What does best even mean for you, right? What are these outcomes, and can you get to a point where you take a project that will improve employee satisfaction, right, empirically? It'll give you a lift by 20% versus an R&D effort that will cut costs, right, by 10% by engaging in it, versus a project, right, that will drive an increase of 20% in revenue. How do you compare those things?
Yeah, yeah. Well, not easily. I mean, people try, right? I mean, they're constantly at R&D productivity, and they still love the averages, right? It's easy to do averages across an industry, which way harder to do it within an organization.
Yeah.
But I think that, I mean, our industry my industry has largely assumes IP, right? So there's an assumption that IP is relatively straightforward. It's going to be fixed. It's going to be and they like to simplify. So they go, right, that's the thing that's fixed. Now we can vary some of the other stuff, but I guess that it's not fixed, right?
What becomes interesting in IP, you just go back to Roche, because I've spent a lot of my life, right, these past couple of years delving into them.
Yeah.
You look at their intellectual property strategy. It is what is disclosed. One of their drugs, right, on patent for 39 years.
Mm-hmm.
There's some strategy that goes into something like that.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and even like 20 years ago, they decided to go into biologics and targeted therapies instead of small molecules. Because those things are way harder to copy, even if you don't have IP. So,
Yeah.
I love the kind of complexity of that, the uncertainty of that, but that's often sits at odds with this kind of belief in what you did before is going to be fine.
Yeah.
Are you optimistic about the future of data and where it's going, and what makes your eyes sparkle when you think about it?
The thing. So I'm very optimistic.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reason being, I know for us, we're working on a product, right, to take all of this know-how, be able to throw it right into a dashboard, and we're looking at attempting to be able to interact with your enterprise through pictures. This
Mm-hmm.
is what we do. This is our value chain, and logging into normally it's a SharePoint site, or maybe you're in Salesforce, but seeing a picture, right, as a reminder day in, day out. Oh, this is what our business does. I work in this department. Oh, I can investigate what is going on out there in the world, in technology, in financials, in competition, new startups that are out there, right, getting capital. And I can interact with these things right through images. I feel like if I get to a point where I'm able to launch this, right, with the right partners, it should attract a lot of other individuals that are working in very boring graph databases right now, trying to make something happen with unenriched data, and
Mm-hmm.
it looks silly to
Mm-hmm.
me. But being able to show sometimes what best could be, there's a lot of people out there way brighter than me that are going to look at what we have and they're like, oh man, put this kid back in preschool, right where he belongs. Now it's time for the pros to show you what can be done. And I think that's going to be really exciting for
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah. If you want to go looking at it, that's the, as you say, if you want the McKinsey report, which tells you the answer at the end of the, or on slide 2, then that's probably got some time in it as well.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, definitely you can. I mean, just the challenge that we see repeatedly, one of the biggest obstacles that we've had is the data stories. They're so different. To put them into a template, we realize immediately how much we're leaving right off the table, right, in terms of value, being constrained, right, by a template to populate that template. Is so much information, right, is missed, and you can't possibly go from a McKinsey report or BCG or any of these large enterprises, right, they'll take a $500,000 from you. They'll deliver a result in 6 to 9 months. And in the meantime, right, this is okay. We're waiting for this. We're going to get some conclusions. And the things that I've seen as a recipient of some of these reports, and where people come to us having been recipients of this report, it's like, great, we got a bunch of information back that we already knew, but because it has the right header, it is ends up being more compelling for the decision makers, right? It's a very much CYA exercise. But where's the connection to the capabilities of the company?
Yeah. It's interesting because in terms of decision science, I mean, Richard Feynman, Edward Tufte kind of, took apart the Apollo mistakes and blamed PowerPoint, and then we're in 2022 and people, I just saw a Twitter thread about, McKinsey's secrets for making great slide decks, as if like the slide deck's the point, and, they're doing slightly nicer Harvey balls or whatever is the goal of life. And you go, well, to your point, what did you leave out? What did you show me? What did you decide that I thought was important? And, what else might I have been interested in? We've been doing this journey together.
Yeah.
So I'm aware that I'm kind of eating into the time that I had with you, Matthew.
Oh, sure.
I'm going to ask you things like, your favorite books. I'm going to ask how people can find you easily online or elsewhere. So let's start with the books. Are there any books that you'd recommend that we read to get us a little bit closer to your insights?
Oh man! All right. So as a masochist, there's certainly some books on leadership that I enjoy. Jocko Willink has a book, Extreme Ownership. Fascinated by the principles and owning things. That's a good one. Greg Larkin's got a great book for anybody that's up against the machine, right? That is their company. This Might Get Me Fired. That's a fantastic one, and it's a real interesting way to have a career. Yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm really pulling the pin out of a hand grenade, right, and chucking it in, and this is what's going to happen. But I'm confident in what I'm doing, right, is for the betterment of the company. Steering the ship. Those are real good ones. I really like. I do enjoy a lot of history books. They're fascinating to me. A lot of history, read up a lot on the Civil War. World War II was a big one. Strategy, managing people, how do people make decisions, right, in the most dire circumstances, and then the human condition, right, as part of this experience is fascinating to me.
Yeah, I'm getting a sense that you don't want the pre-digested versions that you were taught earlier.
Give me the data, man. You almost, as a child, and at least over here in the U.S., there's these books, right? You kind of choose your own journey. It's like, man, get me closer to the facts, get me closer to the raw data, and I wonder if how I might piece together the story. I wonder if I can get to the raw data, if that might give me some insight that maybe no one else has had. And certainly, I find these things translate very well into the business world.
I bet you do. Yeah, I remember reading one. I think it was a Steven Pinker examination of violence, and he got to the Civil War and examined how seldom the weapons were fired, right? When they were picked up from the battlefield, how that often most of them had never been used. This kind of idea that mostly people avoid, killing people if they can, and then the trauma tends to come from some of that stuff. So I can only imagine how much you would get from, some of those data.
Yeah, absolutely. And personal correspondence, Abraham Lincoln's very well documented over here in the U.S. We're starting to see a proliferation, right, of a new spin on some of these topics, and what his presidency meant for the United States. And the thing that I'm immediately struck by are the conclusory statements, and it doesn't always jive with what I understand from the underlying data. So it's just fascinating. It seems to me increasingly in this world with things that happen in terms of press releases. Obviously, we just got through a pandemic. Understanding what it is we know and why we think we know it and how much we want to share. I find people against the critique of people just want a simple story, right? You can't inundate them, right, with facts. It's a very dangerous thought, and I'm not sure why it would be so in vogue. It's highly suspicious to me. I don't find people to be like that. People want the inside scoop, and even in innovation management, knowing something that no one else in your enterprise does, right, is a form of power. And being able to see these things, hopefully, with this data revolution that we have, we can encourage that intellectual curiosity in the population at large. I think it would greatly benefit society. Greatly.
Yeah. No, knowing something no one else knows has to be one of the goals, right, of development of any product. Never mind never mind the investigation of what just happened in the pandemic. That traditional good versus evil story is not gonna, can't last for long. You would hope.
Hopefully.
If someone wants to find you, Matthew, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, sure. So certainly on LinkedIn, LinkedIn, Matthew.Wahlrab. That's a great spot. I'm somewhat of a prolific poster with my long format. Obviously, I'm a very verbose person. Love talking. I wish I was better at writing. Would love to be more succinct. That's a good spot for me. And then we do some posting on our webpage in terms of kind of thought pieces that we put together. Rapidalpha.com.
Amazing. We'll put as much as we can into the show notes as well.
Appreciate it.
This has been wonderful. Thank you for such an enjoyable tour around your thought process.
Likewise.
Anything you wish I'd asked you that I forgot to do?
Oh man, I just the things that really fascinate me really are on how you construct multiple shots on goal, and for the work that you do in working with these companies, right? I see these fantastic, phenomenal successes that you have. I think one of the stats is 7 out of 10 of the best results, right, that have come out of pharma.
8 to 15 in the last year. Yeah.
Mike, how? How?
Well, I think because we're interested in the process, right? It's a systems thinking instead of a knowledge. I don't have the answers, but we know how to go looking for them. That's a bit like you. That's the point.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike.
That's it for this week's episode of Idea Collider. To continue the conversation, visit our website at ideapharma.com. Follow us in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcast. Until next time, I'm Mike Rea, wishing you great success.